Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Valencia, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 22-23 September New Coordinator webinar from the California Department of Education. Today's webinar, we will focus on accessibility. Before we hand it off to our very knowledgeable presenters, we want to address a few housekeeping items. First, all participants are muted. Therefore, in order to submit your questions during the presentation, you may use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Please do not confuse this with the chat feature. For this webinar, we will only be using the Q&A feature. Please note there is an upvote feature. This allows you to vote on questions you like so you don't have to submit duplicate questions. Plus, it lets the presenters know what questions you want to address. Second, a copy of today's note-taking guide was sent to you via email. If you haven't received it or need to access it again, the URL has been placed in the chat box. Clicking the link will take you to a folder where you can download the guide or make a copy into your own Google Drive. There is no edit access from the link we shared. You have to make your own copy first. And lastly, we will be recording today's presentation. An archive of this presentation will be available to view on the training archive page of the CAASPP website. And with that, I would like to introduce today's expert panelists. We're fortunate to have with us Janine Penny from Palo Alto Unified School District and Jennifer Bourgeois from Corona Norco Unified School District. Take it away.
Welcome. It's our pleasure to welcome you to webinar number 2 of the new coordinator training series for the 2022-23 school year. Again, my name is Janine Penny, and I am the assessment manager in Palo Alto Unified School District, and I've coordinated state assessments for roughly 15 years. So what is our agenda for the next hour? We will briefly cover the why of accessibility, specifically why accessibility is so important in assessment. Then we will jump into the 1, 2, 3, 4s of accessibility. We will cover the individual student assessment accessibility profile, or ISAAP process, and then assign your homework before we answer your questions. Let's start with a review of the learning goals. By the end of the training today, you will understand the purpose behind accessibility, the 1, 2, 3, 4s of accessibility, and your part in the ISAAP process. Before we jump into today's topic, we want to remind everyone here about the coordinator checklist. To help support the success of all LEA coordinators, either CAASPP or ELPAC, the CDE has created a coordinator checklist. There is one checklist for each program. This is definitely one resource that you're going to want to use throughout the year. There are different checklists created for each role within POMS. Links to the LEA coordinator checklist are in your note-taking guide. The checklist includes a comprehensive list of the tasks and activities that are part of your new role. The checklists are very detailed and include the key activities you will need to do. You may have other tasks you want to add to meet your district needs. The tasks are listed month by month where they are most likely to occur, but some tasks may occur in other months depending on your local schedules and plans. The checklist can be adjusted to best fit your local needs. You can download the checklist in Microsoft Word where you can customize it to better meet your needs at your LEA. For example, there might be some activities listed on a checklist that you aren't responsible for in your LEA, so you could remove those. In other cases, you might have additional responsibilities and you can add those to the checklist. Finally, you can reorganize the checklist to make your tasks appear in the exact order that you will accomplish them at your LEA. The checklists contain important links that lead to a source description that holds more details or tells exactly what resource you need to accomplish a particular task. As we go through the online training opportunities this year, we will use these checklists to organize webinar content and focus on tasks you could be doing or planning to do soon. We also want to remind you there is a year-long training plan for new coordinators. In June, we held a full-day training for ELPAC coordinators. This training was hosted by 16 county offices of education, or COEs, throughout the state. Then in July, we had our first new coordinator training webinar, which was a deep dive into receiving scores. Then in September, full-day trainings for CAASPP coordinators are being held by the same 15 COE partners across the state. And here we are with webinar 2, a deep dive into accessibility. Up next, we have webinar number 3 in October on student practice, webinar number 4 in February on security incidents, and webinar number 5 in April on preparing for scores. This is supplemented by additional full-day trainings in November for ELPAC and in December for CAASPP. We mention these trainings for a few reasons. First, if you're brand new or missed any previous trainings, you can always go back, watch archived presentation videos, or read notes. Second, don't forget to register for all of these wonderful opportunities. They're optional, but highly recommended, and they're meant to support you through your first year in this role with just-in-time information. Links to register are in your note-taking guide. To help us understand the importance of accessibility resources, let's start with why. California students demonstrate a wide variety of skills, abilities, and interests. They come from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds, have different experiences, and live various socioeconomic circumstances. A core principle of California's assessment is accessibility for all students who take the test. Accessibility resources provided on CAASPP and ELPAC assessments ensure equitable access for students with diverse accessibility needs and preferences. CAASPP and ELPAC assessments are designed so that all students who take them, including students who are learning English or have special needs, can participate in the test meaningfully and demonstrate what they know and can do. As a result, the interim and summative assessments include accessibility resources that address a variety of access barriers, allowing all students to show what they know and can do. I'd like you to consider an imaginary student. We'll call him Patrick. Patrick has difficulty reading and writing. Imagine that Patrick is taking a math test with his class. The test comes in 2 formats. One presents the problems on paper. The other presents the problems on a computer screen that gives test takers the options of hearing the words read aloud through text to speech. A student like Patrick would most certainly achieve a higher score on the second version than he would on the first. Other students might also benefit from the computer-based format by virtue of the reading support it offers, their own preference for working with computers, or other factors. Here's another way to think about it. With equality, we have 4 bicyclists that all have the same bike. They have equal equipment. The problem is that one cyclist is in a wheelchair. One is very tall and hunched over on a bike that seems too small. One is using a bike that looks like the perfect size, and one small cyclist is trying to ride a bike that is much too big. So instead, you want equity. With equity, each cyclist is provided a bike that meets their needs. The cyclist in the wheelchair is provided a modified bike. A tall cyclist is now riding a larger bike. The cyclist who had the bike that was perfectly sized is still riding this bike. And the small cyclist now has a bike that is appropriately sized. Equity means that each cyclist has the correct equipment they need. Equality is not the same as equity. In the past, we often talked about equality in education, providing each student with the same educational opportunities. Now we are focused on equitable education, providing each student with the tools and resources they need to be successful in school, to graduate ready for college or career. And those needs can vary greatly by individual students. Our goal is all about equity. Some students need something entirely different to help them achieve their goals. When we provide all kids with exactly the bike they need, either in size or structure, they are all able to enjoy the full benefits of the activity. Now let's walk through the 1, 2, 3, 4s of accessibility. The 1 in our 1, 2, 3, 4 is purpose. We have one purpose when it comes to accessibility: access. Access and fairness are issues for all students when it comes to learning and testing. Students with specific learning needs may require accessibility resources during instruction and on assessment so they can demonstrate mastery of content with validity. Remember, specific learning styles doesn't equate to only students with special needs. It is about ensuring all students have access. Some examples of this are test items that require extensive reading, even when the construct being measured is not reading, or requiring students with fine motor difficulties to handwrite their answers to essay questions when keyboarding could just as easily be used. CAASPP and ELPAC assessments were developed using the principles of universal design for learning, or UDL, and with a recognition of those diverse characteristics and needs of students who participate in those assessments. Through this collaboration, an array of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations is available to ensure that students' accessibility needs are met. When it comes to how students access the accessibility resources, there are two options: embedded and non-embedded. Embedded resources are digitally delivered as part of the technology platform for the computer-based test. Non-embedded resources are available when provided by the local educational agency for either computer administered or special form tests. Keep the following in mind. Some embedded resources are available only for specific items, such as the test questions, or specific domains for which they are allowed. If a non-embedded resource is shown to be available for allowed items, it may be used only for specific items for which the embedded version of the resource is available. Here's an example. The embedded calculator is a universal tool, and it is only available for certain items. If the student is using the non-embedded calculator, which is an accommodation for smarter balance tests and a designated support for tasks, they should only use the non-embedded calculator on allowed items. Resources include the CAASPP and ELPAC tests fall into these three basic categories based on the universal design for learning. There are resources that support students to remain engaged with the assessment, for example, providing breaks, a separate setting, or even noise buffers. There are also resources that support students by allowing them to respond through various actions and expressions, such as through an adaptive keyboard or by using a scribe. And finally, there are resources that support students by varying the way in which the assessment is presented. For example, all or parts of the assessment might be translated for an English learner, or the assessment might be read aloud to struggling readers through text to speech. The statewide assessment system utilizes a multi-level approach to providing accessibility resources for students. There are 4 types of resources. Universal tools are tools and resources that are available to all students based on their individual choice and preference. You do not have to do anything to turn these on for students. They come built into the test and include things like Zoom, Notepad, Highlighter, and Strike-Through. Next are the designated supports. They are available to all students for whom a need has been identified by an adult who is familiar with a student's instructional needs. That's right, you do not need an IEP or 504 plan to get designated support. Just an identified need, such as an English learner, a struggling reader. This is great information to pass along to site coordinators and teachers in your LEA, because this message sometimes doesn't always get heard, and it really should. Designated supports include things like translated text directions or text. The next level are accommodations. For accommodations, the student does need an active IEP or 504 plan, and the accommodation must be written into the IEP or 504 plan. Accommodations are things like ASL, Braille, or word prediction. I'm going to pause here before we move on to the fourth type. For these three types listed so far, universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations, students who use these during tests will still get a valid test score. I'm going to say it again because it's really, really important. The use of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations does not affect the student's test score in any way. These resources do not change the construct of what is being measured. Now, the fourth type is an unlisted resource. The student needs an active IEP to use unlisted resources, and there is a process involved in requesting them. Unlisted resources are resources that are not already identified as an allowed universal tool, designated support, or accommodation on the accessibility matrix. To get a student access to an unlisted resource, the test site coordinator may submit a request to the California Department of Education through the Test Operations Management System through TOM, a minimum of 10 business days before the student's first day of testing. The CDE will review the item and determine if the construct being measured is changed with the use of this resource. If it has not changed, the student will get a valid score. If it has changed, the student will not get a valid test score. The California Assessment Accessibility Resource Matrix, or the Matrix, contains all universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations for CAASPP and ELPAC. The Matrix is your one-stop shop for information about accessibility resources for these assessments. The link has been placed in your note-taking guide. This document is a great resource, and we recommend that you keep a copy handy at all times. There are also one-page documents that list the available resources for each assessment. They are called Accessibility Resource Graphics. A link to these resources is in your note-taking guide. Now, before I pass it on to Jennifer, I want to note that both the Matrix and the Accessibility Resource Graphics are being updated for the 2022-23 school year, and they'll be posted to those same links shortly. And so I'll pass it to Jennifer to talk about the equitable process.
Thank you, Janine. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Bourgeois, and I'm the Director of Research Evaluation and School Improvement in the Corona Norco Unified School District. And I am in the beginning of my 8th year of leading this work at a district level, and super excited to be here to share these pieces with you. So let's talk about an equitable process. We have talked about assigning supports equitably, as well as what types of supports are available. But did you know that there is a process defined by the Smarter Balance for this work? This process ensures that students have resources for assessments that align with what they receive in their instruction, and that those resources are available in the system. We want the process to be equitable so that all students can show what they know and can do on the statewide assessments. And you, as the LEA coordinator, play a big role in defining, promoting, refining, and championing the process in your LEA. Let's look at the process from start to finish for accessibility. Accessibility resources can help students learn and demonstrate their learning during daily instruction and on assessments if used consistently, effectively, and appropriately. ISAAP, which stands ISAAP stands for Individual Student Assessment Accessibility Profile and contains 7 steps. This easily customizable process helps educators establish a consistent and effective system for providing appropriate accessibility resources to students based on their needs. The 7 steps for the ISAAP process are roles and responsibilities, information and training, identification, selection, Tom's entry, pre-admin check, testing session check. Steps 3, 4, 6, and 7 are handled by educators who know the students. But as a coordinator, our focus needs to be on steps 1 and 2, as well as 5, depending on the LEA. Step 1 of the ISAAP process is roles and responsibilities, which means knowing who does what in your LEA. Roles means identifying appropriate staff to support the process by providing accessibility resources. LEAs should also establish a team with representation from school sites to help develop or maintain the use of accessibility resources. Just a reminder that this work may be embedded into an already existing team in the LEA. For responsibilities, the LEA team should address how information will be communicated to the various audiences across the LEA. This includes parents, teachers, administrators, and students. Communication is critical to effective implementation, both face-to-face, verbal communication, and written communication. A plan for how the LEA staff will provide support to the sites as they implement the process and how equitable, appropriate use will be mentioned would be also critical to be an effective implementation of the LEA process. Let's also take a moment to consider special education staff and IEP teams that exist in your LEA. Special education staff and testing coordinators are constantly engaging in discussions to ensure that students with an IEP or 504 plan are provided with the correct accommodations as outlined in their plan. CAASPP and ELPAC coordinators need to be in regular communication with the special ed department and be aware of how to pull data from the special ed data systems such as SACE. We need to make sure that there are no breakdowns in communication so that they all receive the correct accommodations. Please note in your note-taking guide, there are some additional resources to support you. Step 2 is information and training, which means ensuring that accurate information and explicit training is provided to the different education groups in the LEA. Ideally, this step would occur early in the year and would help prepare the educators and other staff in the LEA to make sound decisions regarding use of accessibility resources in the classroom and on the assessments. There are some items to consider as step 2 is addressed. Who in the LEA needs information and who needs explicit training? When will the trainings occur and in what structure or format? Who will provide training to staff on what resources are available to which students? Who will engage families? How will they be engaged? Families should be provided with basic information on availability of accessibility resources and on the site or LEA contact and know who the site or LEA contact person is if they should have questions. What information needs to be included in the training sessions and what reference materials can be used? CDE and ETS have a variety of reference materials that can be used for local training that will be shared later in this session. By addressing these questions, the LEA ensures that the selection of accessibility resources is consistent, equitable, and appropriate. And again, there's additional documents in your note-taking guide to provide additional support. In step 3, educators identify students that would benefit from supports. Remember, we want the resources on the assessment to match instruction, so students receiving supports in the classroom is a great place to start. We need to make sure that the educators identifying students are familiar with the students and their needs. Again, we want this process to be equitable, so the training aspect from step 2 should cover how the identification is done in your LEA. Once each individual student's needs are identified, it is time to match the students with appropriate resources. This is step 4, selection, and should include the student in the selection process. Again, as the LEA coordinator, you probably won't have a role in this step, but training is important, so it is done equitably. The CDE has released a web-based tool called the ISAAP tool, which may be used to help educators understand how the available accessibility resources align with various student needs. This, in turn, helps educators select the most appropriate resource for assessment. Users enter student data into the tool, select specific assessments, and identify student needs. The ISAAP tool will then create a list of accessibility resources which match the student needs. The ISAAP tool can be used in facilitating uploads to TOMS. However, this is not its primary function. The link is in your note-taking guide. Discuss this tool with your team to see how it might support your processes. Step 5 is TOMS. In this step, the designated supports and accommodations that have been identified for students are entered into TOMS. This can be done manually or in bulk. Data for the bulk upload can come in a variety of places, including, but not limited to, your student information system, your special education data system, or the ISAAP tool. There are many ways to accomplish this work. Entering the selected accessibility resources into TOMS is the responsibility of the CAASPP and ELPAC coordinator at the site or LEA level. Who does this will vary depending on your LEA setup. For example, in our district, we have the sites collect the information, and then I have a team that will upload them as a district. Janine, how do you do that in your district?
We do a file upload we pull it from Cyrus for IEPs and 504. We're a little bit smaller district when it comes to the 504s, and those are manually entered, and we've got a process for that in training.
Excellent. So the bottom line is it really depends on your district, but it's a collaborative effort to define what is going to be the best and most efficient way to ensure that kids get what they need. And the biggest takeaway here is that you need to know what the process is in your LEA. For steps 6 and 7 in the ISAAP process, this happens to be close to the time when the summative assessments will be taking place. It is important to note that steps 6 and 7 are only required for designated supports and accommodations, but not for universal tools. Step 6 is the pre-administration check, meaning that all resources are checked in TOMS before testing starts. You can do this by pulling the student test settings report in TOMS to verify students are assigned the correct accommodations and designated supports. In our district, we use that process where we download that report, and internally we review the information we've received from the sites, and then we also share it back out with the sites. Further, we also train our test site coordinators to go in and verify the data as well, as they are training and providing support to their teachers. Janine, how do you lead that work in your district?
Well, I'll touch on the last point, sharing the information with the site coordinators. I'll review with them which supports might require one-to-one testing or small group testing. And if there's, for the non-embedded, if any pieces of paper need to be distributed, like the multiplication table, those extra supports that are outside of the computer. And then if there's translations that need to occur, who does that? And at what point during the testing process? Sometimes it's just the launch of the test, and other times it's the entire test. So making sure that coordinators and staff at the sites understand those pieces.
Thank you. Step 7 is the test session check, where the test administrator checks the supports in the test administrator interface as the test session is started. This means that the test administrator will need a list of assigned designated supports and accommodations for this group of students. The test administrator approves the students who log into the test session and uses the view settings icon to confirm the correct accessibility resources are available for each student. If test settings are not correctly assigned, do not test until TOMS is updated. It can take up to 48 hours for each system to sync. We have one last thing to do before we get to all of your questions, and that is to assign you homework. I promise that you, well, we're not really assigning you homework. Instead, we want you to focus on the tasks that you have before you and some of the next steps that you need to accomplish your goals. So the homework. First up, we want you to find out what is the process in your LEA. Or if you find that there isn't one, figure out how you can get together with a team of people to create one. Next, we want you to share resources with your site administrators. Links and descriptions of resources are in your note-taking guide. And lastly, start thinking about the training needs of those in your LEA around accessibility. The note-taking guide contains links to existing resources, which are a great jumping off point. And now I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Paul, who will take us through our Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer and Janine. So for the participants, now's your time to ask our presenters any questions regarding this process. Feel free to use the Q&A feature, and we can, I guess, just kind of monitor them as we go. Looks like we do have one from Anonymous. It says, is there a way to preview what the assessment and accommodations look like as a student?
Yes, there are some amazing videos that will show the embedded resources in action. And the majority of them are less than 2 minutes. And really, once you see the preview at the beginning, you can skip through and it's about 30 seconds. That's actually a really important resource to use while you're in the decision-making process, to even show the student to determine, is this support really helpful? So it's helpful for the decision-making process, for the teachers, and for the students.
And I would piggyback on that to say that the interim assessments are also a great way where if you've read the description and you see how it may be beneficial to the student, you can assign it to have the student use it in an interim assessment to get feedback, to find out, is it indeed going to help them to demonstrate their learning.
Wonderful. All righty, we have one. What is the best way to upload accommodations so that the students have them for when they take IABs, the interim assessments?
So the process is, first I'll clarify one piece. The process for uploading is the same whether there are IEBs or the summatives. Once you upload them, the supports are available to students. And how you upload, it might depend on your SIS. Your SIS or the platform, your web-based platform for IEPs. For example, I previously stated we use Cyrus for IEPs, and there's a file extract that we can download and then upload into TOMS. Jennifer, what's your process?
We do a variety of pieces. One of them is for the students with that are special ed. We do leverage SACE and download that report. They've done a nice job of making one that can feed directly into TOMS. But for the other resources for everyone else, we work with the school sites to determine, and then depending on the volume, we do uploads. So if it is a a specific thing, like for our DLI students, our dual language immersion, we might add the Spanish translation, but it's really being intentional to determine what are those needs and helping sites to understand that it really, to your point earlier, Janine, it doesn't impact the score in a negative way, right? Because that is an old mindset that we've had. And we are really, the intentionality of resources is to give kids that playing field that they need to demonstrate. So part of that is that conversation. And so those that can increase the information to upload because there's more numbers.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, next up we have, if a student uses the calculator, non-embedded, how do you make sure they only use it on allowed items?
So I would like to first jump in, and then Janine, I'm not sure if you have anything to add on this, but when we work with our sites to understand what does that accessibility resource mean, it is a human and a thing, right? So that means that the calculator would be available, but they would have to have a person there to be able to remove the calculator when the calculator is no longer on the screen. And that was that guidance was provided to us by ETS early on when that resource was included. So it's a human and a thing, meaning the calculator, to be able to monitor and remove the calculator when it was no longer available to every other student.
And to emphasize when you know it's available, there's a little calculator icon that appears on the screen when the student is on a calculator allowed item. So remember, calculator is a universal tool. So when it's available, it'll appear on the screen and the student uses it. If a student needs the non-embedded calculator, then there's an adult in the room that sees it on the screen and then hands the student the calculator and then removes the calculator when it's no longer available. I know we repeated it a little bit, but that's a really important one to bring up.
Wonderful. Okay, I guess someone's asking again about the matrix. Has it been updated? I know Janine, you had mentioned that earlier.
It's coming soon, right? CDE will be posting it soon.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so one person is asking, we use SEIS for IEPs. And I don't know if they can clarify, that's all they state.
Yeah, I had a wondering around the question. So SACE is their special ed system for their IEPs. If you could clarify what you are asking about, that would be helpful. So then we can best support you.
Wonderful. Okay, how do I find out if our district complied with the 95th percentile requirement?
So Jennifer, feel free to jump in on this one if you want. It is my understanding that that's related to accountability. So we should see that information when the California dashboard is released under additional reports. We'll be able to see precisely the 95% for your district by school and the different student groups.
Wonderful. Okay. Is there a best practice for uploading accommodations coming from a 504 plan? Uploading the SEIS file seems to override these.
I haven't had that experience with the 504s we handle independently. We don't do a file upload, but we do gather the information from our SIS.
But I'll give an example about the overriding because we did experience this and then had an aha moment. So English learners who don't have an IEP or don't have a 504, those are entered in manually in our district. Now that wouldn't work for a lot of districts, but that's how we do it here. If someone were to accidentally enter in English learner supports for an English learner who has an IEP, then when I go to grab the file from Cyrus and upload that file, it would wipe out whatever anyone entered manually. So our directions here are very clear. If a student has an IEP, regardless of what other demographic they have, it has to be in their IEP, whether it's an accommodation or a designated support. So you want to make sure that there isn't any overlap with student groups that don't have IEPs or 504s, because they will be wiped out if they were manually entered and then uploaded. Jennifer, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that was a great description.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Is there a time period / deadline that parent guardian notification must be sent? So is there a deadline, a time frame?
I don't believe so. And Jennifer, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I don't believe there's a timeline, but I think there's two pieces to remind new coordinators around communication. So you want to start off?
No, go ahead. You look like you're just ready to jump in.
Well, there's a notification around their rights, and that's a really important one. And for us in our district, we do notify parents via our parent-student handbook around their rights of the CAASPP is our test that parents can opt out of. And so that is one of the pieces that is important to notify. That's the legal obligation. And then we, right before testing, generally about 3 weeks or so, we will message out to the families that we will be embarking in our CAASPP testing season, and to reach out to their school sites to get the specific schedules. But the really important one on the legal obligation is about their rights to opt out.
Wonderful. Thank you. All righty, we have a question here. If the accommodation has been uploaded and the student goes to the practice test and toggle off guest user, thus signing in with their SSID, would they be able to use the supports during that practice?
So practice tests are not, those are not where they would be able to get their accessibility. They would have to go through a secured browser, which means that our test site administrator would have to launch a test for them to get access to those accommodations. The practice tests are public, and so that would not be specific to the student. There are features within the practice test that they can experience, but it would not be directly related to the accommodations that a student has assigned to them in the TOMS system.
Okay, thank you. All right, we need a clarification here. IABs will have access to the accommodations, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Will it take up to 48 hours for accommodations to appear in TOMS?
That is such a great question, and I'm glad that it was asked for the group, because it can. Once something is entered into TOMS, that something has to sync with the student testing platform. So that can take up to 48 hours.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, here's another one. If I enter all of the accommodations and DS into TOMS now, the students will also be able to use them for the interim assessments as well, correct? And I can edit those up until the point we begin the summative CAASPP, and then they are locked, correct?
Yes, that is such a perfectly worded question. Once the student logs into the summative for the first time, everything is locked. But you can add, revise, delete all the way up until that point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, is there a way for the accommodations and designated supports and SACE under the statewide assessments be inputted into TOMS directly?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Deneen, but this has been a future enhancement, and then we had COVID interrupt this process. But I believe, isn't that a part of the big picture plan, going from all of the connections to CalPads to everything, that the data will flow, which would be nice.
Yeah, we would all love that. And I think, yeah, it's in the works, but not there yet.
Wonderful. Okay, how do we determine who our Caltech Success Agent is and how do we contact them?
So there's a great feature at either CAASPP.org or ELPAC.org. Over on the right side of the screen, it says contact us, I think via email. And as soon as you click on that, you can start typing in your LEA name, and then the email address for your success agent will pop up. So that's very helpful.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have another one here. What about students with IEPs who are not qualified for alternate ELPAC, but refuse to test and or are nonverbal? We have some students who will not sit for a test at all. It is impossible to test them. So I guess any suggestions on how that can come about?
With regard,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
you go.
I was going to say one starting point, there is guidelines of for the alternate ELPAC, when to proceed to the next answer. I think it's no response. You still have to proceed through the entire test, but you're basically clicking through to get to the end of the test. In regards for not sitting to test at all, I mean, Jennifer, do you want to add on to any of that?
Yes, so if you have students that, and I know you probably have teachers who will tell you they should be taking the CAA or they should be taking the alternate ELPAC, but they just don't qualify. In particular with the ELPAC, what we have looked at is, do they qualify for a domain exemption, for example, on the nonverbal piece? And so you want to work as an IEP team to look at all the accessibility resources. Are there accessibility resources you can add to then make that experience one where they will sit for the test? And then the last piece to that puzzle would be chunking it. You don't have to do it all in one setting. And in fact, if you have a student who's not sitting for very long, engage them in a section a day perhaps, and that can help reach that goal. But we understand and recognize that sometimes there's challenges with some of the kiddos to having them sit for a test.
Okay, here we have, it sounds like it may be a process of revisiting a student who is nonverbal being identified as an English learner. I guess they're looking for some kind of clarification or confirmation rather.
I'm not sure. I don't see that question.
It was one of the last,
Okay.
yeah, down at the bottom.
So the question is, how can a student be identified as an English learner if they're nonverbal? I think that might be the question. And that is possible because I've seen nonverbal students being identified as English learners because it has to do also with their listening as well and the home environment that they grow up in. And so that then goes back to the home language survey. So how did a family indicate their home language survey? And as a reminder, with the law changed in 2019, where a family filling out a home language survey, if they feel they filled it out in error prior to a student taking the summative LPAC, they can correct that. But without more information, I don't know if I would be able to give you some additional guidance. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess this is a question for you, Jennifer. What district do you work for? And you had said that you could upload accommodations with the download from SACE. This person would like to know more about that after this, if possible. Because they use SACE and would be great to learn how to do this.
Yes, so I'm in the Corona Unified School District, and I would be more than happy if you sent an email. And I think we may provide our emails at the end. I don't remember. But I'm in Corona Unified, and I'd be more than happy to provide information on how we do that process. And we use that also for identifying the students for the CAA, the California Alternate Assessment. And then now with the alternate LPAC, we leverage those reports in there as well.
Wonderful. Okay, the next question. Can you have a domain exemptions for initial ELPAC? We have tried all that you suggest for some students. What do we do if they just cannot be tested and we have exhausted all of the suggestions you are making
Ooh,
in the
great.
initial ELPAC?
That is a great question. Janine, do you have any suggestions for them?
It's really tough. I mean, I think that that's happened in every district at some point. I think following the guidance, and if you have to just make your way through the test, you've probably also tried just parsing out the test in smaller chunks to try to increase comfort for the student. Possibly trying a different test examiner, but we are required to test every student and include that information in the student's EL file so that you have record of it, because that can definitely impact the results. It's a tough one.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree. I think we've all been there, and just trying different ways to connect with the student, building that relationship with the student is critical. Talking with the parent as to the challenges, and the parent might have some suggestions as well. And so that partnership is critical.
All right. Looks like we have, okay, this other question is anything added in TOMS can take up to 48 hours, correct? Also, TOMS is preset for SBAC. So if a student takes a CAA, we need to make sure to change this before 48 hours to administer the test when we'd like.
I would say give yourself more than 48 hours, because it's 48 hours through each system. And so when you think about that, going from TOMS into TIDE, and then I don't bank on 48 hours. I don't think I've ever had it just be 48 hours on a change, but times could be different and we could see a faster process. But Janine, have you had only 48 hours from the assignment to being in the system to deploy? If you have, that's awesome.
From the district coordinator perspective, talking to the different site coordinators, then, go down into the case managers and so on. It's just, please, let's all make these decisions well in advance of testing so that students have opportunities for practice, maybe with an IEB or otherwise, to try to avoid that. But yeah, 48 hours. I tend to tell people a week just to add our own internal buffer, but then knowing that it can take 48 hours is the minimum, right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. I think maybe this is a repeat, I'm not sure, but it's how do we determine who our Caltech success agent is and how do we contact them? So maybe it's the same question. I don't know, just, or maybe someone else is asking this.
It's worth repeating again. Why not? So if you go to either CAASPP.org or ELPAC.org, on the right-hand side of the screen, it will say how to contact Caltech. And if you click on the button to email, then you'll be prompted to type in your LEA, your district, and then it will display the email address for your region's success agent.
Wonderful. Thank you for repeating that. Okay, here we have, will there be a new initial ELPAC for 4-year-old TK students who have never been in school?
To my knowledge, the initial ELPAC for TK is the same as Kinder, and I have not heard of any conversation of differentiating for a TK test. But who knows, with universal TK, that maybe that is a future enhancement. But for everything I know, it's Kinder and TK take the same test.
Thank you. And would you suggest using SACE, Tom's report, to upload versus the ISAAP tool?
For me, that's the one I prefer, but I don't know if Janine has a different thought on that.
We use Cyrus. That's our IEP tool, and I download and upload. That's the process that we use in our district for students with IEPs.
So use the same process, just a different system.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another one, and I'm not sure if it's a question, but it just, the person says, I believe it is prior to the initial ELPAC, not the summit of ELPAC, regarding changing the HLS. I guess
It is before the summative. So a parent will fill out the HLS, the home language survey, and that will trigger needing to assess the kiddo. And you can change it then. So it's any time before they take the summative, but once they take the summative, they're locked in as an English learner at that point.
Okay. Thank you. All right, well, that about wraps it up with our questions. I guess we can go ahead and finish this out. Thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. That's very, very helpful, and I'm sure the trainers appreciate it as well. All right, so to wrap it up, we would like to promote some upcoming training opportunities. As you know, the links to register for all of these trainings are in the note-taking guide. We also have the October coffee sessions happening on Tuesday, October 11th of 22 from 2 to 3 p.m. These virtual coffee sessions hosted by the CDE and ETS will offer opportunities for LAA staff to ask questions, get answers about assessments, trainings, resources, and more. The coffee sessions are entirely dedicated to answering questions about assessments and topics of interest from testing coordinators and providing timely updates. All righty, save the date for the 22 California Assessment Conference, or also known as CAC, which is happening October 18th through the 20th in Riverside, California. There will also be a condensed virtual option for those who cannot make it in person. In person, attendees will have access to over 60 sessions, as well as a networking reception on the 17th. LAAs from across the state will come and present on best practices for increasing assessment literacy, how they use assessment tools, and how they tie assessment data to improve teaching and learning. For more information, the link is in the note-taking guide. And lastly, we have a new coordinator webinar scheduled for October 27th from 3 to 4. This will be about resources for student practice, including practice tests and interim assessments. And lastly, as always, if you haven't already, we want you to register for the Assessment Spotlight emails. These were covered in the June ELPAC training and the July CAASPP welcome webinar. Instruction on how to subscribe are in your note-taking guide. If you want another way to hear about assessment updates, please follow the CDE Assessment Division on Twitter at CDE Assessments. And that brings us to the end of our training. We hope that the information we shared today was helpful and timely. As always, we want to remind you that you are not alone in this work. You can reach out through the networks of coordinators in similar roles throughout the state, your LEA success agents, and you always have staff at the CDE ready and available to answer your questions. With that, we all thank you for joining us. Please reach out if you have any questions. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take good care.